Former DA leader Tony Leon says South Africa's economy will not grow without a proper strategy and presidential leadership. His comments come as the country tries to woo investors as global leaders meet for the annual World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Tony Leon joins us now to expand on his views in the article published on News 24 today. Mr. Leon, good evening to you. Thank you for your time. We're going to get to the part about why you feel South Africa needs presidential leadership and what you mean by that. I'm sure that is going to be quite interesting. But first, let's answer your question when you say, does South Africa and its government have a growth strategy? What's your answer to that question?
It absolutely does not. Doesn't mean that there aren't press releases and speeches, as you saw President Ramaphosa make last night in Davos. But a strategy, to quote the British political strategist Peter Mandelson and his Prime Minister Tony Blair, is like a washing line. You've got to have items of clothing that are joined together, and you've got to align your your day-to-day problems or plans with a year-long, multi-year strategy. And we don't have anything like that. We have a whole lot of contradictory announcements, pronouncements, policies, some of which are not just illegal and unconstitutional, but anti-growth. So let me give you, since you mentioned the World Economic Forum at Davos, an example. We've got very limited exposure there, obviously, with Trump, Milei of Argentina. There's a lot of other people sucking the oxygen. But we do get some sit-down time with some big business moguls, and one of them was obviously Mr. Lakshmi Mittal of Xoli Mngambi in the world and South Africa. But we're not actually meeting with him to ask about more investment here. We're meeting with him to desperately plead with him, the Minister of Finance and the Trade and Industry Minister, to not close down their existing operations in South Africa, precisely because of a whole range of government policies or non-performances which have threatened now to derail one of our biggest steel manufacturers, and therefore with a huge knock-on effect for local business, local industry, the motor car manufacturing plants, and so on. Now, this didn't come out of a bolt out of the blue. Warnings had been made, and I'm just using that as an example on a multi-year basis. They'd either been ignored, they'd been neglected, and there's a long list across a whole range of sectors. If you have a pro-growth strategy, you say, look, I'm going to subordinate or sacrifice some other things I want to do, whether it's BEE, the National Democratic Revolution, because I'm fixated on growth. And it's not incidentally me speaking. I mentioned in the article, but it's historically correct, that in 2012, President Ramaphosa, when he wasn't president, was the chairman of the National Planning Commission. And they said by 2030, that's in 3 years' time, we'll have a sustained 5.4% GDP growth every year, which would have actually meant, if we achieved that, growth divided by the population would have doubled in about 13 years.
Yeah.
But with the low growth we've got, 0%, 1% maybe this year, we're going to take 70 years to get to the target that Cyril Ramaphosa set in 2012 for us to achieve by this year or by 2030. So that means that the day-to-day policies, the practices, the prescriptions of government are completely misaligned, and they're certainly not joined up to an overall strategy to promote growth. And really, without that growth, we're not going to get the jobs, we're not going to get the infrastructure repaired, we're not going to get all those public goods, which quite rightly not only are demanded by our citizens, but are promised to each South African in terms of the Constitution we inaugurated in 1996.
So when the president stands up at the World Economic Forum and says, he's asked the question firstly, give us 3 reasons why investors should pour money into South Africa. And part of his response is that come and see the reforms, come and see just how much progress has been made in South Africa, and come and have a look at how we are addressing governance challenges. And you can include in that corruption. Are you saying that the president is misleading investors? And Why would he do that when this country so desperately needs investment? You will remember his investment campaign to try and get billions into South Africa, but in this instance denominated in dollars. You remember that investment drive. Why would the president say that?
And there was a lot of fanciful arithmetic around it. Look, obviously, Sir Ramaphosa, I'm speaking now as a detribalized lawyer, has got to put his best case forward, and that's what he's paid to do, and I'm pleased he did it. The problem, though, is what the evidence shows. It's not what his wishes might be, and obviously we all endorse those wishes as South Africans who want growth, who want employment, who want to tackle poverty and inequality. The problem really is, just for example, let me just give you two events in the last week. Number one, Parks Tau, the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition, published regulations last week which would oblige, if they, I don't think they're lawful, but that's another matter, every foreign company, multinational, to hand over 25% of the proceeds of anything it makes in South Africa to fund BEE targets if it's not BEE compliant. Well, you know, no one is going to open the deal book and say, I'm coming to a country, but I've got to divest myself of 25% of the worth of my company in that jurisdiction. There's nowhere in the world that's going to happen, and it's not coming here.
Yeah.
Secondly, I listened with close interest to your interview just before I came on, with which he was very diplomatic, obviously, with the head of the Hawks about corruption in South Africa and one particular target. There's an article yesterday in News 24 which enumerated 4 cabinet ministers, not 1, 4, who are currently in the crosshairs of various state investigatory agencies. Now, I'm not saying they're guilty. I'm not saying they've been convicted. I'm not saying they've been sent to prison. That hasn't happened. But when with credible, you know, state investigative agencies, you have these cases developing, or indeed in the case of the Zondo Commission, they've already rendered their judgment, you've got to say, if you're serious about fighting corruption at the top, because the presidency the appointing authority, why do you retain or indeed appoint people to your executive, your cabinet, who are tainted by corruption or by unjustified enrichment? That means that there's a gap between what the president says in public and what he does in the cabinet table.
Yeah.
That's the credibility gap which my article alludes to, and you've got to start eliminating those gaps if you want this country to grow.
Well, I'm going to add a 5th minister there, and that is partly...
Sorry, undercounted.
That's partly because a case has been opened against them. Dean McPherson, this is someone who comes from the ranks of the Democratic Alliance, a party that you have leanings to. And
no,
the
I was
allegation...
a leader. I'm a member, so
Indeed.
you don't have to be polite.
There we go.
Yes.
Okay. The allegation, the allegation against him, let me finish this. Let me finish this.
Yes,
the allegation against him is that he went and instructed that a certain company be paid because they were just taking too long, the entity that belongs within his ministry. And that is wrong. We all know ministers are not supposed to interfere when it comes to operational matters in departments. Are you disappointed by that kind of action?
I think it's completely bogus. Let's be clear. Mr. McPherson is not being investigated by the Hawks or the police. A charge was laid by an EFF MP, so, you know, take that where it comes from. The second thing is, I think it's bogus because, as I read it, and obviously I don't have the facts, I only know what I've read just like you, he was requested by President Ramaphosa's chief officer, one of the senior officials in his office, Mr. Rudy Dix, to please make sure that the IDC, which apparently a very delinquent and late payer of its lawfully entered into contracts, settled this matter because it was apparently 19 or 20 months overdue. And it wasn't McPherson sort of putting pressure on a particular government official. He was responding to a request from the presidency, Mr. Rudy Dix being one of the most senior members, to go and please make sure this happened. Now, if a minister has committed an offense because he's requesting a lawfully rendered bill or invoice to be paid by a state entity, I mean, why we still have the IDC, I have no idea, but that's another debate for another day.
Yeah, it's the IDT, by the way.
IDT, yes. Well, sorry, the Development Trust. I'm not sure why we need it in addition to 100 other agencies, and that's goes to another point about deregulating the state, not adding to the regulatory regime, which is also part of the reforms we need. I just don't think it passes the smell test. But sure, listen, McPherson, once again, I'm basing it on the statement he made, says, my books are open. Please come and check.
Yeah.
Please check the emails. Tell me where the offense is. So I'm not sure in this case, in fact, I'm pretty confident it is in any sense, manner, shape or form similar to the Hawks or a judge. In the case of the minister, incidentally, that you identified in respect of the Palabora municipality, it was a judge, not some opposition MP, who said that that particular transaction, the contract that she presided over or enforced, was repugnant and required investigation. So I don't think they're in the same universe, these two particular matters, with respect.
I've got to agree with you 100% there. It was the judge who actually uttered those words against Minister Njabeni, who was then a municipal manager. Final question, and we've got to quickly deal with it. South Africa needs presidential leadership. What do you mean by that?
Well, look, the leadership authority flows from the top. We have an enormous over-concentration of power and authority in our president. Now, you know, from Nelson Mandela to Cyril Ramaphosa, the powers have been the same. How they exercise it will determine the shape, form of government. And not everything that's going to improve this economy comes from the government, but government is a big player. Whether it should be or not is another matter. And if the head of government doesn't actually crack the whip and align all other parts of government to a strategy to promote that 5.4%, which we've never reached, that he set his sights on back in 2012, then the president is not leading. He might be doing other things, but he's not giving the leadership we need.
Tony Leon, short and sweet, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much.
Former DA
Good
leader.
night.
Thank you. Thanks indeed for your time. All right.